Hey there, this is Sam Mortensen, and I'm recording a video today about single file components in Drupal. This is a module I wrote quite a while ago, but I realized I've never recorded any video on it. So let's dive in, and I'll let you know what the heck it is. So first we should talk about Vue. So Vue.js is a front-end framework like React or Angular, and they provide this cool thing called single file components. This is a special feature that lets you have a .vue file that contains your template, your JavaScript, and your CSS in one file, and somehow that all magically becomes a Vue component that you can reuse. So here's why I think this is cool. Everything's in one file. If you've ever worked on a Drupal theme for the first time, and you're trying to figure out where the heck did this markup come from, it's really hard. Or even harder, why is this button blue? That's a really hard question to answer in Drupal. So this is cool because everything's in one file. Hot reloading and compiling is easier to accomplish, and what I mean by that is if you know that one file changed, you know that all the usages of that component need re-rendered or changed. Metaprogramming is easier. You can do things like alter things about this single file before it becomes its final product. And then 1 and 3 can lead to more consistency. If everything is a single file component, I think it is really easy to work with. So let's think about Drupal. What does a Drupal single file component look like? So we need to think about what Drupal frontend looks like. For one piece of Drupal frontend, you have a Twig template somewhere. You have CSS. You have JavaScript that's global, so this is like just plain old JavaScript. You have JavaScript in a Drupal behavior, which is like a special Drupal-specific thing that you'll never use anywhere else. And then you have PHP, and the PHP is everywhere. It's in entity view alters, it's in preprocesses, it's in a field formatter build method. It's everywhere. So this is where my module, single file components for Drupal, comes in. So let's just dive in. Here's a really simple example. On the left, you can see this .sfc file. It provides some CSS. It looks like the hello class is a bit bigger than normal. It provides a template. This is a Twig template that renders a hello message with the hello class. And to use this, you can see on the right, you just include it like any other Twig template. You include with this sfc -- prefix the name of the sfc file, so hello.twig, and you can pass it context, and then somehow this renders, and it includes that CSS, which is great. So this is kind of like auto magic, which it's okay to be afraid of. So let's just go in a little bit. SFC files are basically used to derive plugins. They're called single file component plugins, and these are used throughout the module for all sorts of different tasks. Included in that is that my module knows that there's CSS because there's a style tag, so it knows it needs to make a library definition. So it does that. It also has a Twig loader, so if you do sfc -- the plugin ID, it will try to create a single file component plugin instance and then use its template. It also prepends an attach library call to the Twig template to include the stuff generated in step 2. And then when the library is actually used, that's when this component CSS is written to like a real file. So you do get real CSS and JavaScript files on your site, just like you would normally. So here's another example that's really long, and I don't want to go into it too much, but the important part is this includes JavaScript, and it has this interesting behavior where if you click this element, it'll generate a random color. It has some CSS, it has the actual Twig template, and it actually has some PHP too. So you can see this prepare context method is kind of similar to a pre-render or a pre-process. It lets you do things to the Twig context before it's used. And there's also this selector variable, which we'll get into right now. So you may have noticed the script tag had data type attach, which is totally unique to my thing. What this does is that it takes simple JavaScript that assumes it's already in the context of the component. That's why I'm able to use just this. And it transforms that into a normal Drupal behavior with all these best practices built in. So Drupal behaviors are really weird. I totally get why they're needed. I've used Drupal for a long time. But for anyone that's written JavaScript, they're really obtuse. They're basically a way to work around the same JavaScript being run too many times on elements that are reloaded or loaded with Ajax. So the point is, my module will wrap all of your code in the best practices stuff and then run your code, so you don't have to really care about Drupal's APIs. You can also define single file components in a class, and honestly, this is where I started, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. And when I showed it to people, they're like, wow, this is really disgusting. So this still exists, and this is the backbone of how those SFC files really work. But this is just optional. I'm just showing it because you can define a single file component in a class. It's a plugin, so you need your plugin annotation, and you have these constants that define like the template, the CSS, and other methods related to it. So we're going to kind of try to go quickly and go into some of the features I think are really cool for this module. So let me show you the features. First is that I have created this thing that's kind of like magic definitions, and it's kind of hard to explain, but the summary is that it lets the single file component plugin you've made act like other plugins in Drupal. So if you make a single file component, it can also work like a block, it can work like a layout, and it can work like a field formatter. And you do this by adding to the default definition these subcategories or sub-definitions that are exactly what you would normally do if you're defining a field formatter, a layout, or a block. So this is a class component, and it's a bit simpler when it's a single file component. You can just write some PHP to change the definition, and what it does is that in the bottom right, this will now show up in the UI as something called blog component block, and you can place it in the core UI or in Layout Builder or wherever you want. Another feature is that a lot of times components aren't reusable. They're actually used in one place as a full page. So this could be like a really custom landing page, or let's say a listing that you didn't want to use views for. It's very common. So what I've done is created a default controller for you to use if you know that all you want to do is just render your component on a certain path. So this is a routing YAML file in the top right. You define a path, and you'll notice that I'm passing name as a parameter, Symfony parameter. You give it the controller that I provide you, and that needs your component ID, so it knows what to render. And then what happens is it loads up your component, it renders it, and it actually passes the Symfony parameters as Twig context. This is kind of tricky, but it ends up being really nice because you can have this abstract thing that says hello, and you can use it in a ton of places, but also use it at this path hello-name. Very cool. I've also added this concept called aliasing, which lets you include your components in a simpler way than saying like SFC -- the full plugin ID, which can be quite long. You can define aliases. So for example, this is now aliased as hello. So you could just write in Twig, include hello, and it should work. It should just render your component. This is great. It goes against some best practices because you don't want like two component libraries providing like very simple components because they're probably going to collide. But for you, it's probably okay. Components can also provide forms. So you need forms if you provide something like a very complex block where you want things to be configurable. Very common use case. So we'll go through the single file component kind of quick. It has a Twig template that announces a role, like what you rolled. It has this method build context form, and this is used anywhere that needs a form. So that could be a block, a layout, a field formatter. It could be anywhere. So it gets past this method, and then you define the form just for this component's context. So in this case, the user can configure the number of sides on the die. And then the prepare context method actually does stuff like change caching. It sets the number of sides with a default, and it actually generates the random role. So this is a kind of complex but cool example for how you do this. And again, think of how you would do this normally. If you wanted a block with a form, that's quite a lot of PHP, and you still have to write a Twig template, CSS, maybe JavaScript, a library definition, all this stuff. and this just makes it very simple. If the idea of putting your CSS and your JavaScript in the component seems gross to you, like if you like all these other features, but this part of it is a sticking point, you can just define an inline library that points to other CSS and JavaScript that you need. You can also define your library dependencies. Like if you know you need jQuery, you can put the dependencies key in, and that works also. So another feature is that components can override any other theme hook. I didn't want to add this for a long time, but it seemed useful even if I don't like it. So what it lets you do is you can have a component that with this magic overrides key in the plugin definition will just start overriding this other theme hook. So for this example, the article's title will use this single file component. So the reason I don't like this is it's not very abstract. This component is very coupled to Drupal now and is also very coupled to like entity fields, but totally get why you would do it. And so this is a nice feature. And then another example is that if you want to use ES6 or SAS or any build step, you can do this by putting your SFC files that are like raw and uncompiled in a separate directory, and then putting them through a compilation step and pooping them out in the components directory. So I've provided an example gulp file you can use. It's in the examples module that lets you do this. So this is an example. The component uses ES6. You can see arrow syntax. Uses SAS. You can see nesting, and it works. I also wanted to just say that while single file components does nothing to enable like magic integration with front-end frameworks, it does work quite well. So in this example, this is Alpine.js, and you can see that I'm doing something with Twig to pass down a Twig variable all the way into a JavaScript framework. This is something unique to Alpine, and it works. So it's kind of a cool way to see Twig communicate down to a JavaScript framework with single file components. But again, this isn't unique to me. It's just an area that I'm exploring, and it seems cool. So those are like big features. Let's talk about usability. So one thing single file components does is that I've tried to make it extensible. Since it's real libraries being generated and real CSS and JavaScript files, you can always use library extends or libraries override in your theme to override stuff from another component. This works just fine. You can also override the template just by using that same template name, sfc -- whatever. That works. If it's a class component, which is rare, but it'll happen, you can just extend the class. Simple PHP stuff. You can also alter the plugin definition. These are real plugins, which is cool. If you ever used any plugin APIs, it opens up a million cans of worms, but also fun stuff. And a note I wanted to make is that a lot of other component stuff for Drupal doesn't allow extensibility. I think it's probably because most people making component libraries aren't thinking of them that way. They're kind of like, if you use this, you have to use it the way it is. But what's cool about this is it allows you to provide single file components in your module or theme and know that your users can extend them. So this is maybe more cool for open source people, but they can be extended. Kind of a more nerdy thing that I like is that components can be tested using normal Drupal testing stuff. Whether it's kernel testing, unit testing, or functional JavaScript testing, or even Nightwatch testing, which is not here. You can render components using some helper methods that I provided. You'll have to dig in to find them. But you can include them and then render components and test their output. So this is awesome, and also something that you normally would have to do with something like a Node.js framework. What makes this cool is that your components now can be really coupled to Drupal. They don't have to be super abstract, and you can test them in a Drupal environment. So this is really, really cool. I don't know if you may not have used any other component framework before, but this means your components can call Drupal methods, for instance, and be tested in Drupal, and that works. So kind of cool. Another thing is they can be manually tested. This is probably most people's stuff, but the SFC dev module has this nice component library you can use. You can dive in, click on any component, it renders it. You can tweak the Twig template. You can tweak the form if it has a form, and you can test them out. So you may be asking how this is different from other projects, and I kind of hate this because front-end is so weirdly competitive and people are so opinionated, and I really don't want to give the impression that this is better than anything or even good. Like, it's up to you to decide that by using it, but I will talk about what I think is different about it. So one is that there's no build step. You can literally write a .sfc file and rebuild cache, which we'll do later, and that just works. You have something you can use right away. SFCs are also extendable and overridable, like I talked about before, whether it's the CSS, JavaScript, or the Twig template, and that's cool, pretty unique. It also keeps you in Drupal. You don't have to really learn a lot of new stuff. You can do all the Drupalisms you want, and it works. I think that using SFCs as blocks, or field formatters or layouts, is actually easier than writing those normally. I know that's a big claim, but I can make a block with a Twig template and CSS in like 30 seconds, and I feel like that would be very hard otherwise, so this is a great feature. I love the metaprogramming aspect of it. This is more for me than you, but I can tweak the stuff you build and enhance it and add to it and wrap it, which is great, and that's not possible normally. I love single file components in general because everything's in one file. Think of a junior dev jumping into a project and they're like, what the heck is this button? It's like a theme random Sass thing. It's like a Twig template. It's a pre-render function. And now you can just give them one file and say, everything is here. You don't have to worry about it. Make your changes here, test it by itself, and it'll just work. And then I love the testing. It's so rare that we get to test stuff in Drupal, especially with front end. And now we do. So I like that. So I'm going to breathe, and I'm actually breathing like this right now. I kind of talked a lot, but we're about done. So let me give you my last thoughts. This module is stable. It's ready to be used. I went kind of all out with test coverage. I think it has 100% test coverage, or maybe 99 something. So I doubt it's going to break on you. I also have no planned features, so I don't know how it could unless Drupal core breaks. Another thing is, I think the only feature I've planned right now, this list used to be long, is that Vue.js has this concept of scope styles. What this is that you can have a style tag. You can write your styles as if they were already nested in your element or only relevant to your component. And then Vue will add some stuff. Basically, it like prefixes every selector with some crazy data tag. I can't describe it well. But the point is it makes it easier to write styles. It makes it so you don't have to nest as much. If you want that, let me know, and I can write it. I just haven't written it yet. And that's it. We're going to make a component right now live. This is the second time I've run through it, and hopefully it works. So let's go over to my IDE. So I'm in Drupal 9, and I have a module called SFC example. It's where a lot of those code snippets were from that you saw. And we're going to make a file. We're going to make an SFC file. So any components folder within a modular theme that has .sfc files in it, I know that's a lot to remember, will be recognized by the module and included. So you can have like nesting here. It's quite nice. But we're going to just make a new thing called example hello demo. Okay, so this is a .sfc file, and the minimum thing you need is you need a Twig template, kind of regardless. So I'm going to say hello to someone's name, and we're actually going to do a wrapping element so we can style it. So we're going to call it example hello demo, and we're going to give it some CSS. So let's write this, and we're going to say the color is red. Cool. So this exists. The only thing I need to do to get it recognized is clear cache. Okay. And now let's go to my library, reload the page, and see if it exists. So we'll go down. Did I miss it? Oh, here we go. So we can see example hello demo. I'm going to click on it, and you can see it in the preview pane. So this is a cool thing. The single file component library is just something I built. It's obviously not like storybook quality, but it's pretty nice. You can resize components. You can pop them into full screen to just kind of ignore some of the Drupal stuff. And of course, you can render them and change them. So you can see the twig it used to actually render this component. And now I can pass context to it. So I'm going to pass Sam. Click preview, and it said, hello, Sam. So that's pretty great. I should probably quit while I'm ahead, but let's just add some PHP. So I'm going to add this prepare context method. And basically what this does is it takes this variable context, which is any array, and it lets you modify the Twig template variables or context before it's passed. So a typical pattern is you can do something like, if the context name is not set, let's give it a default value. You could do this with merges and all sorts of fancier ways, but this is fine. So we're going to default to Bob. And what this is, it's kind of like a pre-render or a pre-process, but it's all here. So it's pretty nice. I'm going to rebuild cache. And we're going to refresh the page. I could have just re-rendered too, but who knows? So now you can see it defaulted to Bob because we put Bob. What's cool about this is, assuming my cache is okay, you could do small changes and then just click preview and re-render it. Oh, my cache is not okay. But anyway, if my caching was fully disabled, it would be really easy to test changes. So this is great, and I think it's kind of the end of my live demo. I have a lot of other examples here. A lot of them are from the presentation I showed you. I don't think there's any I want to show off. No. But anyway, that was my quick demo. The other thing I would say is I built my recently redesigned homepage all with single file components. So I don't have the project open, but everything you see is a component. There's one for the title, there's one for this little man, there's one for this about section, blog listings, work listings, all sorts of stuff. And I really liked it. It was a good stress test for it, and I think I would use it again. I had a good experience, and I also generated a style guide. So if you go to my website and go to /components, you can see all of my components. Let's see. So here's a header, just like I was saying, and includes a back button that you can change. It has a link to the homepage. If it is the homepage, it shows this guy. Here's the about. Here's the footer. All this stuff. And my homepage is open source too. So you can go to, gosh, I should have had this open. You can go to mortensen/mortensen.github.io and just jump right into the Mortensen components module and check out all my stuff here, which is great. Gosh, I have a lot. One cool thing about this is all of the pages are also components. So if I go into the routing file, the home page is this MC home component. The blog listing is all pages. So I'm not using views to generate any pages. I'm actually using single file components for everything, including the 403 and 404 page, which is awesome. So we can keep scrolling down. I don't think anything's cool. Here's the 404 page or 403 page. So it's cool. This was really fun, and I definitely enjoyed myself making it. Just to finish off, if you want to use the project, you can go to the SFC project page on Drupal.org. There's a lot of information here, but you can just skip to downloading it and installing it. There are no dependencies. And the best way to learn about it beyond this presentation is just jump into the README, which is really extensive. It's not fully up to date, but it's great. It's kind of like all of the documentation in one place. And then this SFC example module just has so much. I've basically split up every tiny feature into its own file, so it should be very easy to read. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you tried the module and like it. Okay, bye.